Most developers think responsive design means media queries. If the screen gets smaller, we add a breakpoint. But that's not responsiveness. That's reacting after the problem already happened. So before we talk about solution, let's first understand why layouts break in the first place. Let's start with a very common layout. A container, and inside it, some cards. At first glance, everything looks fine. And that's exactly why this mistake is so common. But now, instead of assuming the screen is large, let's slightly change the context. And here is the problem. The layout doesn't adapt, it collapses. So let's pause here and look at what in the code causes this behavior. Here's the first issue. The container has a fixed width. This tells the browser, never shrink, no matter what. And once you understand that, the rest of the problems start to make sense. Because the container is fixed. We also force the grid. This means always show 3 columns. So now, let's think logically. If the screen becomes smaller, where should this content go? It has nowhere to go. So at this point, nothing in the layout is allowed to adapt. Which brings us to the next very common reaction. When developers see this problem, their first instinct is usually the same: they add a media query. Not because the layout is flexible, but because it's broken. And yes, this works. But now, let's slow down and think about what just happened. We didn't design for adaptability. We reacted to a specific screen size. And once you see it that way, a deeper problem becomes obvious. Responsive design is not about breakpoints. It's about adaptation. So instead of fixing symptoms, let's rebuild the layout from the ground up. Let's start with the foundation. Instead of forcing a width, we give the container room to breathe. Now, notice what changed. The container no longer fights the screen. It cooperates with it. And once the container becomes flexible, the next improvement becomes obvious. If the container is flexible, the grid should be flexible too. So instead of saying 3 columns no matter what, we say as many columns as the space allows. Now watch closely. As the screen shrinks, columns naturally disappear. Nothing breaks. Nothing jumps. We can finally talk about media queries the right way. Media queries are not bad. But notice the difference now. We're not using them to save the layout. We're using them to enhance the experience. The layout was already flexible. The media query just improves usability. And that leads us to the final takeaway. Responsive design is not about screen sizes. It's about content adapting to space.